Okay, so you're in the right place. If you want to like really get up to speed on something pretty complicated, like really fast.
Yeah,
And today we're going to zero in on Gurgaon.
sounds good.
You know, it seems like we're hearing a lot about this place, like all of a sudden, and you've sent over some fascinating stuff about the real estate market there,
Right.
like a real boom, it sounds like.
Yeah,
So we're going to try to like break it all down
Yeah.
so you can really grasp what's going on.
absolutely.
You know, whether you're just curious or you're actually thinking about, maybe making a move or an investment.
Right. I think the material you've shared really provides such a rich, you know, overview of a market that seems to be going through some pretty major changes.
Yeah.
And we'll be able to dig into like the core reasons why Gurgaon is becoming so popular, the shifts in property prices we've seen.
Hmm.
Just looking at the differences between residential and commercial property, and then also the like absolute necessity of doing your homework like really thoroughly, like
Right.
due diligence. And then of course, like, where are the hot spots now, which areas are sort of up and coming.
Yeah.
And then also, I think offering a realistic perspective on the whole infrastructure situation.
Right.
So, yeah, our aim is to basically equip you with the essentials without,
Right.
overloading you with like too much information.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So let's just dive right in.
Okay.
What is fueling this intense interest in Gurgaon? Like, it feels like a wave of people are moving there, especially from Delhi.
Yeah, I think what's interesting here is there are like several strong trends happening at the same time that are driving this migration.
Okay.
And, as your sources point out, Delhi has kind of hit its limits in terms of how much property is available and how much value can actually grow.
Mm-hmm.
Gurgaon, on the other hand, is seen as having a lot more potential to expand,
Okay.
offering, in a lot of sectors, a more modern infrastructure and a different kind of lifestyle.
Okay.
Importantly, it's near all those big corporate centers,
Right.
so it's a natural choice for a lot of
Yeah.
professionals. But it's not just about money or the economy.
Yeah.
The growth of like good quality educational institutions has also become like a big factor in attracting families who want, a better environment for their kids.
Right.
So it's not just affordability.
Okay.
It's also this changing perception of Gurgaon as like a more desirable place to live
Yeah.
with better urban planning,
Mm.
at least in some areas,
Mm-hmm.
which is something Delhi has struggled with, as it's grown.
Right. Right. So it's more than just an overflow from Delhi.
Yeah.
The idea of a different lifestyle keeps coming up.
Right.
What are the specifics that contribute to this perception?
Well, the information you've shared suggests that it comes down to a few things.
Okay.
New developments in Gurgaon often have better amenities,
Mm-hmm.
things like well-planned gated communities with more green spaces, better security systems,
Okay.
and facilities like clubhouses and gyms and recreational areas.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that being appealing.
People are also drawn to the idea of having more space, compared to what they could afford in Delhi.
Makes sense.
And it's interesting, there's
Yeah.
a trend of people selling their older properties in Delhi and buying bigger homes in Gurgaon.
Oh, wow.
And sometimes they even get like rental income from an extra floor or a separate unit.
Oh, that's smart.
So it really does point to a different way of life.
Yeah.
People want more space, modern conveniences.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Right.
Okay. So more space, better facilities, and maybe even some rental income.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's talk numbers.
Okay.
These reports about property prices skyrocketing are pretty eye-catching.
Yeah.
It seems like things were pretty stable before 2020, and then boom, this post-COVID explosion.
Yeah. It's kind of crazy.
Can you break down that timeline for us?
Absolutely. The sources you share definitely show a big shift.
Okay.
Before the pandemic, the Gurgaon property market was relatively stable.
Okay.
But once things started opening up, people's priorities changed after COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Demand just went through the roof. There are real examples of plot prices in prime areas, like doubling or even tripling,
Seriously?
going from around 1.5 lakh rupees to 3 or 4 lakh rupees per square yard.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And the rental market has followed suit.
Okay.
A 500 square yard builder floor that might have rented for 1.5 lakh is now going for over 4 lakh.
That's a huge jump.
And then you see luxury property deals exceeding 100 crore rupees.
Wow.
It really highlights how intense this boom has been.
Yeah, those are some serious leaps.
It's almost hard to believe those kinds of jumps in such a short period of time,
Yeah.
but it really underscores just how much the market has changed.
Okay, so the big question, the one that's probably on everyone's mind is, does it still make sense to buy now?
Right.
The information you've given us seems to suggest a positive outlook.
Yeah, if you look at these price movements, along with the bigger market trends that your sources talk about,
Okay.
the general feeling is that property values in Gurgaon are going to keep going up
Okay.
for the next 5 to 7 years. So if you're thinking about investing for the medium to long term,
Mm-hmm.
there's still potential for your investment to grow.
Okay.
Of course, market forecasts aren't guarantees.
Right, of course.
But that's the sentiment right now based on what we know.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And, this continued appreciation could be partly because of ongoing infrastructure development and the steady flow of people and businesses we talked about earlier.
Right, yeah. Okay, so for some people, buying might still be a good option.
Hmm.
Now let's talk about something that a lot of buyers and investors struggle with, the choice between residential and commercial property.
Right.
What are the key differences?
Okay, so this is a really important question.
Yeah.
And the sources offer a pretty clear comparison.
Okay, good.
Residential property in Gurgaon is generally seen as a safer bet in the long run.
Okay.
It tends to appreciate steadily,
Right.
and managing and renting it out is often easier,
Mm-hmm.
especially with all the builder floors and apartment complexes. Typical rental yield for residential are somewhere between 3 and 5%.
Okay.
This preference for residential also reflects a larger trend,
Okay.
where individual investors are looking for more control and predictability,
Right.
which aligns better with the residential rental market.
Okay, what about commercial properties?
Right.
The higher rental returns are tempting.
Yeah. The potential for higher returns, like you said, around 7 to 8% with commercial properties is definitely attractive,
Yeah.
but it comes with a lot more risk.
How so?
Well, if you have vacancies in commercial spaces, that can cause property values to plummet pretty quickly.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And finding tenants for commercial property can be much harder.
Right.
Often you need large spaces,
Mm-hmm.
or you need to attract like a big anchor business to draw in other businesses.
Right. That makes sense.
So the rewards can be higher, but so are the risks,
Hmm.
which is why residential property is usually the safer and more stable choice for most individuals. And even for investors who are in it for the long haul and want steady growth.
Right. Stability and consistent growth are definitely reassuring.
Definitely.
Now let's move on to something that can be a bit intimidating, the whole documentation process.
Right.
Our sources say this is a major challenge in Gurgaon.
Yeah, it can be.
What are some of the common pitfalls that buyers need to watch out for?
The most important thing to understand is that you have to be extremely careful when it comes to the legal paperwork,
Okay.
especially in the Gurgaon property market.
Okay.
The sources highlight a few traps that buyers can fall into.
Okay. Like what?
For instance, you might come across ownership documents that are incomplete or unclear,
Okay.
and they can lead to legal battles down the road.
Right. Nobody wants that.
Then there's the risk of brokers misrepresenting things.
Right.
They might not be completely honest about a property's history,
Yeah.
its legal status,
Mm.
or whether it has all the necessary approvals.
Yeah. Okay.
And a really big issue is when properties don't have the occupation certificate.
The OC?
Yeah, the OC.
Right.
This document basically confirms that the property is legally okay to live in,
Okay.
and not having it can create huge problems.
Like what kinds of problems?
Well, it can make the property illegal.
Okay.
You might have problems getting utilities connected,
Mm-hmm.
and it could be hard to sell the property later on.
So basically a nightmare.
Pretty much.
Okay, so for someone who's serious about buying in Gurgaon, what are the absolute must-do steps when it comes to checking the documentation?
Okay, the sources are very clear on this.
Okay.
First, you have to verify all the documents yourself,
Okay.
directly with the official authorities,
Which are?
the developers, and the local revenue office, which is called the TESL.
Okay.
Don't just rely on copies from the seller or the broker.
Right, go straight to the source.
Exactly.
Okay, what else?
Second, you need to make sure there's a clear and unbroken chain of ownership.
Mm-hmm.
If there are any inconsistencies or gaps in the history, that's a red flag.
Okay, noted.
And this is crucial. Before you hand over any significant amount of money,
Mm-hmm.
get a legal opinion and a title search report from a good lawyer,
Okay.
one who specializes in property law in Gurgaon.
Okay.
They can go through everything with a fine-tooth comb and spot any problems you might miss.
Makes sense. So basically, don't cut corners.
Exactly.
And that warning about trying to save money on brokerage fees?
Yeah.
By going with unverified sources, that sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It really is. The sources emphasize that any money you think you're saving by using unreliable brokers
Yeah.
could be completely wiped out
Wow.
if you end up with a property that has legal issues or incomplete paperwork.
Okay.
It's like trying to be clever and ending up losing a fortune.
Right. Penny wise and pound foolish.
Exactly.
Okay, so thorough research, independent verification, and a good lawyer are key.
Absolutely.
Got it.
Yeah.
Now let's look ahead.
Yeah.
Based on your research, what are the hottest areas in Gurgaon right now? And which up-and-coming areas should people be watching?
Right. So the material gives us a good overview of both established and emerging areas.
Okay.
The top tier places right now are DLF phases 1, 2, and 4,
Okay.
Sushinluk Golf Course Road, and its extension Nirvana Country, and sectors 50 and 51.
Right. Those are the big names everyone's heard of.
Yeah. These areas are already well developed.
Mm-hmm.
They have good infrastructure,
Right.
and that's why property values are so high there.
Okay, and what about the next wave of promising locations?
Right. So the areas that are tipped to be the next big thing
Yeah.
are the Southern Peripheral Road, or SPR,
Okay.
the Dwarka Expressway Corridor, DLF Alameda,
Mm-hmm.
and the newer low-rise communities
Okay.
that focus on things like full power backup and strong security.
Okay.
These areas often offer a different kind of lifestyle
Okay.
compared to the more established sectors,
Mm-hmm.
and they have a lot of potential for growth
Okay.
as infrastructure improves and connectivity gets better.
So it sounds like there are options for different tastes and investment strategies.
Yep.
Depending on whether you want something established
Right.
or something with potential for the future.
Exactly. Each of these areas, both the established and the emerging ones,
Yeah.
offer something unique.
Okay.
So you really need to think about what's important to you.
Okay.
Do you need to be close to the business districts?
Hmm.
What kind of lifestyle are you looking for?
Right.
And if you're thinking about renting it out, what do you think the demand will be like in the future?
Okay.
Understanding your own needs and goals is essential.
Yeah. That's good advice.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's talk about something that often comes up when you're looking at big cities in India infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
The information we have mentions problems like waterlogging and power outages in some parts of Gurgaon.
Right.
Should potential buyers be worried about this?
It's definitely a valid concern,
Okay.
and it's important to be realistic.
Mm-hmm.
Gurgaon, like a lot of fast-growing cities,
Yeah.
does have infrastructure challenges,
Okay.
like occasional waterlogging during monsoon season and power cuts in certain areas.
Okay.
But it's also important to remember that a lot of progress is being made.
Okay, that's good to hear.
There's a ton of infrastructure development happening all over the city,
Okay.
and a lot of the newer gated communities now have backup power systems.
Okay.
So they don't have to worry about power cuts.
Right.
And the government is putting more effort into fixing things like drainage and roads.
Okay, so it's not a case of ignoring the problem, it's actively being worked on.
Exactly. It's a situation that's constantly improving.
Okay.
No city is perfect,
Right.
but Gurgaon is definitely moving in the right direction.
So not a deal breaker, but something to be aware of.
Yeah, you should definitely do your research,
Okay.
especially on the specific areas you're interested in.
Right.
But it might not be a reason to completely write off Gurgaon.
Right, especially with all the other advantages.
Exactly.
So to sum it all up, what's the main takeaway for someone who's trying to figure out the Gurgaon real estate scene?
The big picture
Yeah.
is that Gurgaon has changed a lot.
Okay.
It's not just an extension of Delhi anymore.
Right.
It's become a major real estate hub in its own right.
Wow.
People are moving there from all over India and even from other countries.
That's pretty amazing.
It's not just about IT and technology anymore.
Okay.
There are a lot of different lifestyle and economic opportunities.
So for our listeners out there,
Mm.
whether you're thinking about buying a place to live or you're looking at Gurgaon as an investment,
Right.
what's the key piece of advice you'd give them?
Based on what we've learned now, could be a really good time to buy in Gurgaon.
Okay.
The market analysis suggests that property values are likely to keep going up. But, and this is really important,
Okay.
you have to be incredibly careful.
Okay.
Check every single detail of the property documentation.
Right.
Be realistic about infrastructure in different areas.
Okay.
And don't skip on due diligence and get a good lawyer.
Yeah, that final point about being vigilant,
Mm-hmm.
about paying attention to the fine print, that really sticks with me.
It's easy to get caught up in the excitement,
Yeah,
but you have to be smart.
absolutely.
And that brings me to a final thought.
Okay.
You know, people usually focus on things like location, price, and amenities when they're buying property.
Yeah.
But I think the most important thing
Yeah.
is to really think about the long-term implications of every single detail in your transaction.
Like what?
What are the exact terms and conditions in the legal agreements?
Mm-hmm.
Are there any hidden costs or liabilities buried in the clauses?
Right.
You need to look beyond the initial excitement
Okay.
and make sure you understand the whole picture.
Yeah.
Maybe your next step should be to dig into some specific legal clauses
Okay.
or research some potential hidden costs.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah, I think it's important.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you so much for this deep dive.
My pleasure.
This has been super informative.
You're welcome.
And to our listeners out there, be sure to check out the show notes for links to all the source material. And join us next time for another deep dive into a complex topic.
Sounds good.